What happens when Hollywood's biggest names clash with daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe what unfolds when A-list actress Scarlett Johansson sits down with The View hosts, only to find herself in the middle of a political firestorm that spirals completely out of control. This isn't your typical celebrity appearance. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can turn ugly when egos collide and tensions boil over. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of Marvel's biggest stars goes head-to-head with Joy Behar and the rest of the View panel in what can only be described as television warfare. The stage was set for what should have been a lighthearted promotional appearance. Scarlett Johansson, fresh off her latest film project, walked onto the View set with her signature confident stride, flashing that million-dollar smile that has graced countless red carpets. The audience erupted in applause as she settled into the guest chair, seemingly oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf the studio. Joy Behar, sitting at the far end of the panel with her arms crossed and that familiar skeptical expression, wasted no time in setting the tone. Well, she began, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. The woman who thinks she can do no wrong in Hollywood. Scarlett's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. It's great to be here, Joy. I've always enjoyed our conversations. The diplomatic response seemed to irritate Joy even more, who leaned forward with predatory interest. Oh, I'm sure you have. Joy shot back, her tone growing sharper. Especially when you're not being called out for your questionable career choices. Tell me, Scarlett, how does it feel to be part of an industry that preaches diversity while you continue to take roles that should go to other actresses? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Sunny Hostin's eyes lit up with anticipation. Sarah Haynes tried to interject with a more neutral comment, but Joy's aggressive energy had already taken control of the conversation. Scarlett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I think that's a rather oversimplified way to look at a complex industry, Joy. I've always been committed to telling diverse stories and working with filmmakers who share those values. Oversimplified. Joy's voice rose an octave. You took a role that was meant for an Asian actress in Ghost in the Shell, and then you defended it by saying you were just following orders. That's not oversimplified. That's called being tone-deaf. The studio audience began to murmur, sensing the shift in atmosphere. What had started as a celebrity interview was rapidly transforming into something much more confrontational. Scarlett's publicist, sitting in the front row, looked increasingly concerned as the temperature in the room seemed to spike. I've addressed that situation multiple times, Scarlett replied, her voice maintaining its steady tone despite the obvious provocation. I've learned from it, and I've made conscious choices since then to be more mindful of representation in my projects. Sunny Hostin decided to pile on, her legal background evident in her prosecutorial approach. But learning from mistakes doesn't erase the harm that was done, does it? You profited from a role that perpetuated Hollywood's whitewashing problem, and now you want us to applaud you for being more mindful? Scarlett's hands clenched slightly in her lap, but her media training kicked in. I understand the criticism, and I take it seriously. But I also think it's important to recognize that change takes time, and the industry is evolving. Evolving? Joy let out a harsh laugh. The industry is being dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century, and actresses like you are the ones holding it back. You want to talk about evolution? How about evolving past the idea that every major role belongs to you? The attack was personal now, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Scarlett's professional facade began to crack slightly, her eyes narrowing as she processed the deliberate insult. The other hosts exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable with Joy's aggressive approach, others seeming to relish the conflict. I think you're being deliberately unfair, Scarlett said, her voice carrying a subtle warning. I've never claimed that every role belongs to me. I audition for parts like every other actress, and I work hard to earn the opportunities one gets. Unfair. Joy's voice dripped with sarcasm. You want to talk about unfair? Let's talk about how you sued Disney when they released Black Widow on streaming simultaneously with theaters. You were worried about your paycheck while the world was dealing with a pandemic. That's what I call unfair. The audience was now completely silent, the tension in the room palpable. Scarlett's composure was being tested in ways she hadn't expected when she agreed to this appearance. Her publicist had stood up from her seat, ready to intervene if necessary. That lawsuit was about contractual obligations and industry standards, Scarlett replied, her voice growing firmer. It wasn't personal against Disney, and it certainly wasn't about being greedy during a pandemic. It was about setting a precedent for how streaming releases should be handled fairly for all actors. Sarah Haynes attempted to defuse the situation. I think what Scarlett is trying to say is that these are complex business decisions that affect more than just individual actors. Don't defend her. Joy cut Sarah off sharply. She's a grown woman who can speak for herself. Although based on some of her recent decisions, I'm not sure she's doing a very good job of it. The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to provoke a reaction. Scarlett's eyes flashed with anger, and for the first time since the interview began, her carefully maintained composure showed real cracks. "Excuse me." Scarlett's voice was dangerously quiet. "I came here to promote my work and have a conversation, not to be personally attacked by someone who clearly has an agenda." "An agenda?" Joy laughed bitterly. "My agenda is calling out privileged actresses who think they're above criticism. You've made career choices that have hurt other people, and now you want to play the victim when someone points it out." The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with both women staring each other down across the table. The studio crew exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the drama play out for the cameras. What had started as professional tension was rapidly becoming personal animosity, but this was only the beginning. The real fireworks were about to start, and neither woman was backing down. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the interview spiraling completely out of control, attempted to regain some semblance of order. "Ladies, maybe we should take a step back here. This is getting a little heated, and I think we're losing sight of why Scarlett is here today." Joy whipped her head toward Whoopi, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Don't you dare try to silence me, Whoopi. I'm asking legitimate questions about her track record, and she's getting defensive because she knows I'm right." "I'm not getting defensive," Scarlett interjected, her voice now carrying a steel edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm responding to what can only be described as a coordinated attack. You've clearly decided to ambush me instead of having an actual conversation." The accusation hit Joy like a slap across the face. Her expression darkened, and she leaned forward with renewed aggression. "Ambush? You think this is an ambush? This is called accountability, sweetie. Maybe you're not used to it in your bubble of yes men and enablers." "My bubble?" Scarlett's voice rose for the first time, her carefully controlled demeanor finally cracking. "You want to talk about bubbles? You sit behind this desk every day, throwing stones at people while contributing absolutely nothing constructive to the conversations you claim to care about." The studio audience gasped audibly. Several producers in the control room frantically gestured to their colleagues, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue. The other hosts sat frozen, watching two strong-willed women tear each other apart on live television. Sunny Hostin, emboldened by the chaos, decided to add fuel to the fire. "I think Joy is making valid points about privilege and responsibility. When you have the platform you have, Scarlett, your choices matter. And frankly, some of your choices have been questionable at best." "Questionable?" Scarlett turned her attention to Sunny, her eyes flashing with anger. "What's questionable is a group of talk show hosts who think they have the moral authority to lecture someone about their career while you profit from stirring up controversy for ratings." Joy slammed her hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. "Don't you dare turn this around on us. We're not the ones who took jobs away from underrepresented actors. We're not the ones who sued during a pandemic. We're holding you accountable for your actions." "Holding me accountable?" Scarlett's voice was now openly hostile. "You're performing for your audience, Joy. This isn't about accountability. It's about you trying to score points by tearing down someone who's actually accomplished something with their career." The insult hung in the air like a nuclear bomb. Joy's face flushed red with rage, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually stand up from her chair. The tension in the studio was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Accomplish something?" Joy's voice was shaking with fury. "You mean like taking roles that don't belong to you? Like prioritizing your paycheck over public health? Like building a career on the backs of more deserving actors. That's enough. Scarlett stood up from her chair, her composure finally shattered. I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination from someone who's made a career out of being bitter and vindictive. The audience was in complete shock. Several people had their phones out, recording what was clearly going to be viral content within hours. The show's security team moved closer to the set, ready to intervene if things got physical. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Look, I think we're all getting a little carried away here. Maybe we should take a commercial break. And, no, Joy shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. I'm not done. You want to call me bitter and vindictive? Fine. But at least I'm not a hypocrite who lectures people about social justice, while actively participating in the systems that perpetuate inequality. Scarlett's hands were shaking with rage now, her professional mask completely abandoned. You know what, Joy? You're right about one thing. I shouldn't have come here. I should have known better than to expect an actual conversation from someone who's clearly more interested in being outrageous than being fair. Fair? Joy let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that talented actors of color have to watch roles go to white actresses because Hollywood executives are too cowardly to take risks. It's not fair that working class people had to choose between their health and their livelihoods while you complained about your streaming revenue. The personal nature of the attacks was now undeniable. This wasn't about professional disagreements anymore. This was about two women who genuinely despised each other, and everyone in the studio could feel it. You don't know anything about my personal beliefs or my private charitable work, Scarlett shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. You see what you want to see, and you attack what you don't understand. That's not journalism. That's just cruelty. Whoopi tried one more time to intervene. Ladies, please. This has gone far enough. We need to stay out of this, Whoopi. Joy snapped, her eyes never leaving Scarlett. Little Miss Perfect here thinks she can come on our show and charm her way through softball questions. Well, surprise. Some of us actually care about the issues we discuss. Care about the issues. Scarlett's voice was now openly contemptuous. You care about your ratings, Joy. You care about your viral moments. You don't care about actually making a difference. You just want to be seen caring. The accusation struck deep, and Joy's face contorted with rage. How dare you question my commitment to social justice? I've been fighting for progressive causes since before you were even famous. Fighting? Scarlett laughed bitterly. You mean complaining? There's a difference between fighting for something and just complaining about everything from your comfortable chair. The studio was now in complete chaos. The other hosts were trying to speak over each other. The audience was murmuring and gasping, and the production crew was frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. This was no longer a talk show interview. This was a full-scale war. But as intense as things had become, they were about to get much worse. The final breaking point was approaching, and when it came, it would be explosive enough to end careers and create headlines for weeks. Joy's face was now a mask of pure fury, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The veneer of professionalism that had defined her decades-long career was completely stripped away, revealing the raw animosity beneath. You want to know what I really think? Joy's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than her previous shouting. I think you're everything that's wrong with Hollywood. You're entitled, you're tone-deaf, and you're so wrapped up in your own privilege that you can't see the damage you cause. Scarlett's chest was rising and falling rapidly, her anger reaching a crescendo. And I think you're a bitter, washed-up comedian who never made it as an actress, so now you spend your time tearing down people who actually succeeded. The insult landed like a physical blow. Joy's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed to slits. The other hosts looked horrified. This had crossed every line of professional decorum and entered territory that would be impossible to walk back from. Washed up, Joy's voice was barely controlled. At least I didn't build my career by taking opportunities that belonged to other people. At least I didn't sue my way to more money during a global crisis. At least I have some integrity left. Integrity? Scarlett let out a harsh laugh. You're sitting here attacking a guest on your own show for no reason other than ratings. You call that integrity? I call that desperation. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching in stunned fascination as two public figures destroyed each other on live television. Several people in the front row were visibly uncomfortable, looking like they wanted to leave but couldn't tear themselves away from the spectacle. Sunny Hostin, perhaps sensing that things had gone too far, attempted to intervene. Maybe we should all take a breath here. This conversation has gotten very heated, and I think— Shut up, Sunny. Joy exploded, wheeling around to face her co-host. This is between me and Miss Perfect here. She thinks she can waltz in here and charm her way through an interview without being held accountable for her choices. Scarlett's face went pale with rage. Held accountable? You're not holding me accountable. You're grandstanding. You're using me as a prop in your little performance for your audience. Performance? Joy stood up from her chair, her voice reaching a fever pitch. You want to see a performance? How about your entire career? How about pretending to care about diversity while you cash checks that should have gone to more deserving actors? That's it, Scarlett shouted, also rising from her chair. I don't have to listen to this anymore. You're clearly more interested in being outrageous than being fair, and I'm done being your punching bag. The confrontation had reached its absolute peak. Both women were standing now, facing each other across the table like gladiators in an arena. The other hosts looked terrified, the audience was transfixed, and the production crew was frantically trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos continue. You're done. Joy's voice was dripping with contempt. You're done when I say you're done. This is my show, and I'm not finished calling you out for your hypocrisy. Your show. Scarlett's voice was filled with disbelief. Last I checked, this was supposed to be The View, not the Joy Behar Hour. But I guess when you're this desperate for attention, you'll do anything to stay relevant. That was the final straw. Joy's face contorted with absolute rage, and she leaned forward across the table, pointing her finger directly at Scarlett with venom in her voice. You know what? You're nothing but a stupid bitch who thinks her pretty face entitles her to everything. You're selfish, you're privileged, and you're exactly what's wrong with this industry. Get the hell off my stage. The studio erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Several audience members covered their mouths in disbelief. Whoopi Goldberg looked absolutely mortified, while Sarah Haynes appeared to be in complete shock. Even Sunny Hostin, who had been egging on the confrontation, looked stunned by Joy's explosive outburst. That Scarlett's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, and then cold, calculating fury. When she spoke, her voice was steady but filled with ice. Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you really are, Joy. You've just proved every point I could have made about your character. She turned to address the stunned audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what passes for journalism on The View. Personal attacks, name-calling, and bitter jealousy disguised as social justice. Joy was breathing heavily, her face still flushed with anger. Get out. Just get out. Security, escort her off the set. I don't want to see her face for another second. Scarlett gathered her purse with deliberate calm, her movements precise and controlled despite the chaos around her. Don't worry, Joy. I wouldn't stay in this toxic environment for another minute. I feel sorry for your viewers who tune in expecting intelligent conversation and instead get whatever this was. The security team hesitated, unsure whether to actually escort a major celebrity off the set. Scarlett solved their dilemma by walking toward the exit on her own, her head held high despite the humiliation she had just endured. That's right, walk away, Joy shouted after her. Just like you always do when someone calls you out on your privilege. Scarlett paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. The only thing I'm walking away from is the most unprofessional interview I've ever experienced. Good luck explaining this to your network executives. With that, she strode off the set, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure how to recover from what they had just witnessed. The audience remained quiet, processing the shocking turn of events. Joy slowly sank back into her chair, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the magnitude of her outburst was becoming clear. She had just called one of Hollywood's biggest stars a stupid bitch on live television and kicked her off the show. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it was shaky. Well, that was unexpected. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll figure out how to move forward. As the cameras cut away and the commercial break sign illuminated, the studio remained in stunned silence. Production assistants whispered frantically to each other, while the remaining hosts sat in their chairs, still processing what had just occurred. The damage was done. In the span of 20 minutes, a routine celebrity interview had devolved into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Joy's career-defining moment had arrived, but not in the way she had ever imagined. The aftermath would dominate headlines for weeks, with video clips circulating across social media and news outlets dissecting every moment of the confrontation. But in that moment, as the studio lights dimmed and the audience slowly filed out, there was only silence and the realization that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The View would continue, but this episode would be remembered as the day that professional discourse died on daytime television, replaced by raw emotion and personal vendettas that left everyone involved wondering how things had gone so terribly wrong.